cash fund and ritzy property.
Good morning, everybody. Great introduction there, Brian.
Thank
you.
Way
to warm the crowd up for us.
Yeah.
My name is Paul Davis. I am the founder of Slate, so it's a media and consulting company. If you are curious about it, you can go to www.thebankslate.com to see the website. Also, feel free to hit me up at one of the breaks. I have a QR code you can scan as well to check that out. But my job today is not to take over center stage. It's to moderate an all-star panel of experts here to talk about executive recruiting and compensation, which I know is a very challenging thing to do sometimes in the world today. And we'll kind of get some shows of hands as we go through this, as we start talking about some of the topics. But you know, one thing I will say is, quick show of hands, how many of you guys are having a challenge right now with filling a particular management role at your financial institution? Okay, yeah. So hopefully we'll allow for some time if you have specific questions. These are the best guys you could ask right now for the next 45 minutes or so. Without any further ado, let's start with our MC, Brian Love.
Let me just play that whole opening back over again. But I run the depository, or I should say, sorry, banking and fintech division at Travillian. I've been here at Travillian for about 10 years. And best move I ever made, hiring this guy here, Keith Daly.
Thank you. I had to pay you a couple dollars for you to say that. But,
That's right.
Thank you. No, I'm principal banking and fintech search at Travillian. Been at Travillian for about 6 years. Wasn't aware of community banking before I started working here, but I fell in love with the industry. Love speaking with smaller banks from across the country. They're just so in tune with the community and what the lending needs are of that community. So very happy to be here.
And I'm Flynt Gallagher. I'm with Newcleus, and I'm president of the compensation division and also in charge of Links, which is a lifetime income non-qualified solution that everybody should investigate if you don't have it, because it's great, because it solves the #1 problem for people my age, and that's running out of money in retirement. Speaking of age, I noticed Brian introduced the brightest and the oldest. I definitely qualify as the oldest, and I can prove
oldest.
oldest. I started my career in public accounting, and I did my very first bank audit in 1976. So I've seen a lot of changes in the community bank environment. In fact, there were like almost 19,000 banks when I started my career. I did that for about 10 years and moved into banking. Did banking for a couple of different banks, one of them being a large national bank. So I've been through an acquisition, and I can tell you that wasn't a lot of fun. And then I left banking in terms of actually working as an employee and started working as a consultant in the banking industry since the mid-90s. So it's kind of my background.
Perfect. And we'll keep this thing a little bit free-flowing. So if at any point something comes up topically and you have a question, don't be shy. Raise your hand. I'll try to see in the lights and call out some questions as we go along. Let's start just with a general bird's eye view of kind of the recruiting environment. Keith and Brian, just what are you guys seeing in terms of the demand for positions and the talent pool, and kind of how, if there's a juxtaposition, kind of an idea of what you guys are trying to do to kind of bridge that gap between needs and the talent that can fill those needs?
Sure. I'll go first. We've been busy at Travillian specifically with a few different roles. The CFO role actually has been one that we've worked on for the last 2 years. We've done 8 CFO searches. And we're a boutique. That's quite a bit of work for us. Those CFOs in those 8 seats, half of them were retirements, so the aging out of the older CFO. The other half were really upgrades, where the old, view of the CFO as coming up through the accounting track with a CPA. Those banks were really looking for someone who comes up from another direction, FP&A, treasury, even corporate development, M&A background. So a little smattering of different talents there. And the talent pools have shrunk, there's no doubt. Recruiting isn't maybe like it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and partially that's because M&A has really been down. M&A allows, a lot of bankers to be on the streets, looking. But obviously Travillian, in our 25 plus years, we keep a good tab on the great talent that's out there, both emerging and tenured, and even some of those, I call them like kind of miscellaneous, where you kind of close your eyes a little bit, you can see that they can be a CFO even though they don't have the stereotypical resume. So, Keith, I don't know if you want to chime in.
Yeah, risk and compliance really over the last 3 years, especially for sponsor banks, embedded banks. As Brian was saying about the talent pool, they're competing, and I think overall risk and compliance roles, they're also competing with the fintechs, with bigger banks. It's a very, it's an area where, there's a lot of people retiring. There's, limited maybe talent that understands both worlds, whether it's the fintech world, whether it's the technology world. So the talent pool on the risk and compliance side is very, very hot. That market has been, and it's getting even, I think, hotter because fintechs now need to staff up with risk and compliance. The regulatory agencies are looking to the banks, and then the banks are pushing down on the fintech companies. So that area, and also chief technology officer, I think, is going to be a critical role. I know we just placed a CIO, CTO. We're starting another CTO search soon. I think we have a couple more in the pipeline. And the CEOs and the board from those banks are really saying we need a transformational CTO. We need somebody who understands how all these relationships work with the fintechs. Even if you're not an embedded sponsor bank, how do these partnerships work? And also incorporating data and maybe AI down the road.
Yeah.
So the forward-thinking CEOs are thinking about, okay, my chief technology officer is good now, but is that the person who's going to take us over the next 5 to 10 years? So I think that's an area that is going to be very hot, is hot right now, and will continue to be.
Yeah, and in Flynt, I know you from the compensation side, it's not just about bringing in folks; it's also compensating the folks that are already within the bank, right?
It is, and I'll echo what we just heard. Is what we're seeing in terms of replacement is CFO, and mainly, as you said, some retirement, but some burnout as well.
With the CFO position, what are you seeing in just general compensation trends? I mean, what are banks doing? Are they doing anything different or creative to try to keep people in the fold?
Very creative, but trend is up. I mean,
Yeah.
We've seen compensation escalate, especially with the pandemic, COVID. I mean, it really increased pay across the board. We've seen the rate of pay decrease over the last few years. I think the most recent number was 3.8%. But then you read the news about Boeing this morning. Anybody here read about Boeing? They just settled with a union. Anybody? Okay. They settled with the union of 33,000 workers. They agreed to a 25% increase in pay over the next 4 years. Wow. They also agreed to an increase in the contribution for the 401k. They agreed to an increase in time off and a decrease in the cost of health insurance for the employees. So we're seeing these kind of deals go across the country, and it's going to continue to drive pay up. So you have to get creative. I mean, Boeing's got to figure out how in the world they're going to pay for it. I mean, they're having enough troubles as it is. But so when we talk to our clients or anyone else, the first rule is you find out what someone values before you start deciding how to pay them or what to pay them. Because once you figure out what they value and you can structure their compensation to accommodate those needs or desires, then it really enhances the value of what you provide to them and the ability to motivate and retain. So again, ask people, what do they want? And it may be equity, it may not be equity, it may be retirement benefits, it may be more short-term pay or long-term pay. And yes, we see creative stuff all the time.
And Flynt, it's generational too. Remember, we talked about that. different generations want different things.
Well, I mean, it's pretty obvious. My generation, what we want is retirement income, and we want health insurance. I mean, think about where we are in our lives. Gen Z, which is the new generation coming in, by the way, they're not being called Gen Z anymore. They're called Zoomers instead of Boomers. But you know, they're looking more for stability and a career path and the opportunity to stay in a place. They're not nearly as transitory as some of the other generations in between. They want to stay there and learn. So if you give them that opportunity, give them a career path, and compensate them reasonably well, they're not going anywhere.
Yeah. A lot of the Zoomers want equity and to feel part of the
Depends.
team.
Yeah, like I said, equity, I'll give you a story. When I was at First Union, they gave me 200 stock options every year, whether I wanted them or not. And I was 32 years old, and I didn't want them. The stock was $15 a share. It vested over a 5-year period. I didn't have the money to exercise the options even if I wanted to, and 5 years was forever. So when I decided to leave the bank, it never crossed my mind I was forfeiting those options. So again, you have to find out what the person really values. I'll give you a quick story about that. Commercial lender, 28-year-old. He was, the bank was very desirous of keeping him. He was a rainmaker, great young man. And so they came to us and said, what do we do? Short story here. We said, well, what does he want? What does he value? Well, they didn't know, so I asked him. He had recently been married. His wife was pregnant. He wanted to buy a home. He couldn't qualify for a mortgage because he had $70,000 of student debt. So what the bank did is they paid off the debt, executed a promissory note for 7 years. Every anniversary, if he was still there, still performing, they forgave $10,000 plus interest. It allowed him to qualify for a mortgage. He bought a home. That was 6 years ago. I spoke to him 2 weeks ago. He is never leaving that bank because they did something for him that was important to him. So,
wow.
And it's creative, but it's a very simple approach, and we do want to keep it simple.
Especially with all the student debt out there.
Especially with all the
That's a great
student debt.
customized approach
Yeah.
to compensation.
Yeah.
I'd write that down.
Yeah.
Well, it actually reminds me of another story, too. We did a search for head of embedded banking for a bank in the Midwest. And it's related, just they really had to step up their game. They were a smaller bank, and they were going after big fish for this role. And what the CEO did, you know, coming to her, having interviews in her hometown, it was important to her to be there and not have to relocate to this other city. And also the compensation package they put together, they hit upon every cultural element that she wanted, and they landed one of the best candidates in the country for that role.
Yeah.
And this is a little, you know, $2 billion bank, just an extraordinary measure that the bank did to get her there.
It's almost like recruiting a great athlete. You know, they
Yeah.
flew to close the deal in her hometown.
That's exactly right.
And they landed a fantastic candidate.
Yeah.
So it's those little things, I think, that really put that, when you're looking to land a really top fish, that really put you over the top.
Well, I think that's the key thread between all three of you guys, right? It's finding a differentiator. Because in the market, in banking, in the hiring market, on the surface, everything can look very much the same, or it's a matter of the size of the organization. But you have to find something to just, that wrinkle, that extra twist, that something different, right?
Yeah. Well, where's Dave? Dave Yankowski here, Travillian's managing partner. He said a long time ago, what recruiting is, whether you hire Travillian or you do it yourself, it's all about storytelling. That's really what it is. It's storytelling, and it's culture is what keeps people, right? So, you know, the storytelling that goes into a bank that's in the middle of nowhere, but if there's a great story and a great vision for growth, whether it be organically or acquisitively or into tech ventures, those are the things that need to be hit on in a personalized manner. And you can really, that's the secret I tell community banks is, it doesn't matter where you are, if your story is exciting, people will follow. And maybe that sounds elementary, but it's true.
Yeah, it's kind of like I equate it to the home buying market too. The person has to envision themselves in that house.
Yeah.
Much like envisioning how it's going to look when they're in that role at that bank.
Right.
You know? One thing I would love to just talk a little bit about is bench strength too. I mean, obviously it's not just about hiring the CFO, hiring the chief risk officer. The challenge sometimes is also finding those other, especially compliance, those deputy compliance folks too, who you can bring into the company, train them under the compliance chief, so that they can always move up too. I mean, is that something else that you guys see as not only the top position, but the bench, and then compensating that way too, so you have that in-house talent as well?
I think it's so critical because Brian and I like to call it the win the lottery plan. Some people say hit by a bus. We get more positive. Win the lottery. What if that person wins the lottery tomorrow and leaves? Who is filling that role?
Yeah.
Especially chief risk officer, BSA officer. Who can step in? Who is being groomed? But also, it's a retention tool, keeping that person engaged to stay. Because when they start asking those questions, what's my next step up? They start answering those phone calls or those emails from other banks or recruiters. But yeah, Brian and I talk about succession with our clients all the time, Travillian, and there's a big need in that space for sure. But having the bench strength, the emerging talent, engaging with your younger talent to keep them engaged with the culture is so critical, because they're getting calls from fintechs. You don't have to relocate. You can stay where you are. So it's not 10, 15 years ago, or even pre-COVID, where you were only competing with people in your area. You're competing with fintechs in New York, fintechs down in Miami, saying, hey, you don't have to move to Miami, but we're going to offer you more money. So yeah, I don't know if you want.
Well, no, I was just going to say, every bank succession planning generally, in essence, is keeping track of your internal targets and keeping track of external targets. Right. I'm just thinking about a bank we helped. We placed a CFO in that bank, and it was an interesting situation. We actually placed a CFO there. There was someone who actually had to take kind of a little bit of a step back, but it actually turns out to be a much better situation, because the person was maybe not ready to be the CFO of a bank that size. Now they have a CFO in there that's developing them to be that leader. It's such a great situation now. But yeah, every bank needs to be constantly assessing, whether it's through executive coaches or psychometric testing. They should be assessing that second layer. Sometimes the second layer is more important than the first.
And that goes back into what Flynt was talking about the Gen Z mindset. Is they want to be in a company that kind of has that mentorship, that bench strength model as well. So if you're not really invested in that today, that's something to think about, particularly when you want to bring in the Zoomers.
Yeah, one comment is, when I was at Florida National Bank, as a manager, we were evaluated on the staff in our department and how developed they were. So you were evaluated who in your department can step into your position and handle 80% of your job. And if the answer wasn't at least one person, you didn't get a very good evaluation. Because that was part of your responsibility, is developing that knowledge and that education and training. So.
Let's talk a little bit about the technology side of things, Keith. I promised you I'd throw one right at you, right in your wheelhouse.
Right down the fairway.
Because, again, I bet with those of you guys who raised your hands earlier, technology is something that's got to be, front of mind, top of mind as well. So, Keith, walk us through just kind of what the current needs are, what the emerging needs are going to be when you're looking at chief technology officer, but also certain specializations.
Yeah, I'm going to give a shout out to one of our great sponsors, Clarivis, right now. Data analytics is an area that is incredibly in need, and there's such a focus. Community banks are sitting on a gold mine of just incredible data. They just don't know how to tap into it. And there's great companies they can tap into and work with. So I've placed a couple, SVPs of data analytics, and they're just killing it for their banks. That's an area, and it's interesting. Over the last 2 months, I've had conversations with a couple well-known people in the industry, and the topic has been product managers at banks. Not a lot of banks have product managers. I've placed a lot of product managers for fintechs, but there's not product managers at banks looking at just the focus, like almost being a CEO of your own P&L right there. How are we doing? Is the product priced well? Looking at the analytics, the marketing. So product managers, data analytics, and really, I hate to say it, should be starting to look at AI talent. You don't have to go full Elon Musk AI, but there has to be some sort of plan or strategy in the boardroom for what companies are out there that we can partner with. You're probably not going to build it in-house, but there's companies out there. I know there's Bankwell Bank up in Connecticut. They partnered with an AI company out in Palo Alto, Brian Hildebrand, who we know very well there, and they're using an AI program on, I think, small business loans or something. So something like that, you need to be talking about, maybe not implementing tomorrow, but what's the new technology that's coming down the road from that perspective? Because I really think, and a lot of people out there think, that's going to be a game changer from an efficiency standpoint, from a data analytics standpoint, and that talent's going to be very, very hard to find. So, because everybody's looking for that talent.
Yeah.
So that's an area that I would be kind of starting to delve into right now.
So if you have college-age kids, that's where they should be focusing.
Yeah, and a lot of people are talking about going right to college because there's not a lot of AI jobs out there right now, but they're learning in colleges now. So you can get them, but at the same time, you're going to have the Googles and the JP Morgans going after that talent. So it's going to be tough to land that. But you can find kids who are interested in it, who want to be a part of that. But those are, I think, the main technology areas right now that banks should be looking at. But data analytics is really the low-hanging fruit, I think, right now, that you can really tap into.
Sounds good.
I have a question for the panel here. When you're looking at these positions, especially coming out of college, do you have a sense for what the desire is for starting salary?
Depends on the position.
Well, I'm talking about like AI technology.
Yeah. Well, it depends on the market. AI, they're being recruited by every industry. So the salary is going to be very high.
Because some of the statistics I see is that when you ask young people what the starting salary should be for taking a position within a company, it's like $78,000. Unless they're a college graduate, and then it's like $98,000. That's their expectation for their starting salary in a company. And I'm like, that's pretty sporty.
Yeah, and it depends on location too.
It does
Yeah,
depend
if you're
on
in New York,
location.
you're probably going to be looking.
And we're talking about large urban centers primarily.
Yeah.
So. I'm just curious, especially with AI and technology.
Yeah.
I think we have a question.
Yeah, we have a
over
question,
here. Greg.
actually, or comment. So to repeat that, basically, she said in response to Flynt's question of Brian and Keith, those salary expectations can be six figures. And she said location doesn't really matter that much because they can work essentially from anywhere, which actually does cue up my next question for you guys, and that is, in a post-pandemic world, how does work from home, how does all those factors, fluid work environment, play into what talent expectations, and also what's the receptiveness and willingness of the banks to accommodate that kind of flexibility as well?
I'll start by saying that on the executive level, which are most of our searches at Travillian, it's very difficult to have a work from home executive.
Sure.
We do have examples of it. There's a CEO that is, kind of slowly relocating, but, it may not actually ever happen if it's successful. The bank actually has had some work from home underneath, in other tiers. But I would say 95% of our executive searches, relocation is necessary. It just seems like you got to get it, you got to get your hands dirty with your team. Right now, we're doing a CFO search that there's a multi-state presence, and luckily, because of that, they're able to have different headquarters. So that opened up the map a little bit, but not every bank has that. So it's a little bit of a conundrum there.
Yeah, and working with embedded banks, but especially embedded banks, not at the C level, but maybe, or some at the C level, just placed a chief compliance officer who lives in Utah and is commuting to the Midwest. When you're looking for that niche talent, I mean, really, really specific niche talent, somebody who understands embedded and fintech partnerships, you have to be flexible. I mean, a great example, shout out to Coastal Community Bank, who we've worked with a lot. They have talent in Canada with Barb, and we placed Kurt Carews, who relocated because he's the president. But I would say most of their talent that we've placed there Eric Sprink said, just find me the top talent.
Agnostic.
Yeah, I say I want the top talent in finance. I want the top talent in risk and compliance. This is such a complicated bank. I know it's going to be hard to get the top talent because you're taking your talent pool from 100% down to probably less than 5% for relocation to Seattle. And nothing against Seattle. You just have to look for that. And he just said, look, just find me the best. And we need the best. So it really depends on what you're doing as a bank too. I mean, they're partnering with Walmart and everything, and what type of positions you're hiring. But Brian's right. If you're a CEO, CFO, you got to be in the office. I mean, you have to be there. Even if you're an embedded bank, that cohesion at the top level is necessary.
Yeah, makes sense.
By the way, Barb, how many states is Coastal in employees?
I think it's 42.
42.
And Canada.
In Canada, wow.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the executive level, I mean, it's still predominantly you're in the office. But you think about it, that generation, my generation, we're always used to being in the office. The pandemic was just a blip. You need to be at the office to work. We do have clients where the CEO or the other members of the executive team are remote, but that's rare. We don't see it a lot. In other areas of the organization, we do see a lot of work from home. As an example, my next door neighbor, by the way, I live in Florida. My next door neighbor manages a water plant in Hawaii, and he works from home. So it seems to work for him.
By the way, the days that everyone's in the Travillian offices, I don't think we get any work done. Everyone's chit-chatting.
So it is interesting, though, from my perspective. I've been work from home since 2005. When I started at American Banker, they realized that for me to appropriately, keep up with the banks in the Southeast, which is what they wanted me to do, that instead of having me relocate to the Washington or New York office, to just hunker down in North Carolina. Been there ever since. To that point, then when the pandemic happened and American Banker was sending all their New York workers home and everybody was panicking about how are we going to be able to do our jobs, they all got sent to me, and I got on the phone with them and I said, here's the problem. The problem is not you're going to get over this initial stress. The problem is going to be when they reopen the office, you're not going to want to go back. And I do feel like it did trigger a different mindset for a lot of people, especially younger folks. Curious if that's something that you guys have experienced as well.
Yeah, it's critical, I think, it's a shame because a lot of the younger generation, now they're used to working from home or hybrid, but that's the most important time. I know Brian and I, Flynt, we're always in the office.
Yeah.
There's no option. It snowed, had to get to the office. We didn't have work from home. And that's when you meet with your managers, that's when you're
Your best ideation comes from being in a room with people, right?
Yeah, it's really hard to learn and be mentored from a Zoom call.
Right.
So I always tell them, the younger generation, in their 30s or 40s, they're open to relocation because I always say, look, if you want to be CEO or CFO, you got to be in those meetings.
Yeah.
You got to go out to lunch with the board. You have to, be a part of the community.
Yeah.
So for those roles, Brian and I, CEO, there's only so many of them,
Sure.
CFOs.
Yeah.
And now there's even less. 4,400 banks. They will relocate for the right role.
Of course.
It just has to be the right role and the right opportunity and the right bank that they can see themselves growing with. Because they understand that there's a limited amount of CEO positions.
Yeah.
But we also say you can't do it remotely. You have to be
that's a good point.
you have to be
Just the idea you have to have that kind of access.
Yeah, yeah.
And you have to show your face, and that's how you move up. That's a good, compelling way to kind of help these people kind of break out of that mindset they've had for the last few years.
Yeah, that's how every generation up until 2020 lived. It wasn't, some places we worked with was kind of hybrid, but then it became kind of the norm. I think it's shifting a little bit back to at least hybrid.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely see hybrid is pretty accepted across the industry, even at the executive level. In fact, one of the things we're seeing is when they're looking at comp packages is how many days a week do I have to be in the office? And it's a negotiating aspect. Do I have to be there 1 day, 3 days, whatever it is, because they've got in their mind, this is the maximum number of days I'm willing to go to the office on a regular basis. So even at the executive level.
Yeah, and good leaders within a quarter, maybe 2 quarters, have endeared themselves. They've, created that proper communication channel where maybe you can step back and remove a day, as you go. By the way, driving to work. How many people listen to podcasts on the drive to work? It's a great time to kind of absorb information too.
Yeah.
So I think that's useful. I remember talking to one CFO candidate, and he had a 2-hour commute, and he said it was the most. It was the time that he got the most stuff done all day. He was on calls. He was listening to podcasts. He was, he was able to talk to vendors. I mean, think about that. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, Bluetooth obviously changed the game there too, just being able to take calls. Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. We have about 8 minutes left. I figured it's a good time to just see if any questions come from the audience. This is a chance to stump these guys.
Or ask movie trivia.
There we go. We got one back here. Yes. So just in case, he was asking for thoughts about the idea that the new Starbucks CEO is going to be able to jet in and out of the office.
Yeah, well, I've had candidates who go in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then fly back Friday through Tuesday, and then leave Tuesday morning. So it depends how open they are to that. If you have a CFO, CEO who's willing to get on I don't know if it's going to be a private jet, but willing to go to the airport and fly back to wherever he is or she is, I think that gets back to creativity, right?
Yeah, I mean, in that particular situation, I'm pretty sure that's private jet.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Do you want to do that commercially every week? But if it's a company you love and a role you love, maybe you're willing to do that. Maybe you fly out Thursday night. It's not that long of a flight. You're home for 4 days. Tuesday morning, you fly back in. You're there Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So I think the creativity, flexibility now is crucial. And it's how talented is that person? Is that person is that the leader you want? Is that the person you want? It really depends on the culture of the bank.
Yeah. And are the baristas also flying in and out? I
think there's a barista on the plane.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's a great example of they've identified that this person's going to bring value to the organization, and they're going to do whatever it takes to make sure they capitalize on it. And if it's fly him or her via private jet, that's what they're going to do.
And then it's just really up to the company to show, and the CEO to show that it was the right decision.
Yeah.
You have to perform then.
Right, exactly.
We'll know, believe me. We'll get the earnings report, so we'll know.
But I guess what Dion is asking is kind of the lead by example. And, in community banks, we deal with banks that have 50 employees. And if that CEO was doing that at a small, organization, I think there'd be an uprising. But Starbucks has how many employees? Flynt, you probably.
I have no idea.
How many does Buc-ee's have?
Oh, good. Are we going to talk about Buc-ee's now? We can't.
No,
talking about
we'll get this guy started.
There's no Buc-ee's up north here, so yeah.
Anybody? Go ahead.
And I'll repeat that. So his question was about situations where the retiring chairman or the retiring CEO stays on in some role, sometimes it's like the CEO stays on as executive chairman, for example. And just as a quick note, I just contributed a piece for Bank Director on that exact topic, when the chairman becomes a chairman emeritus and whether that causes any kind of dynamics issues. So
and then you add in the family-owned banks.
Yeah.
Maybe the father or mother becomes chairman and the son or daughter is the CEO.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine the board meetings for that. But yeah, because you're going to see a pushback with, that CEO wants to bring in maybe new technology and wants to move into more digital tech, and the chairman and the board, I mean, we could go on. We didn't even touch on the board. I mean, that could be another 2-hour conversation there.
It seems to me that in that process, I'm not sure if it's apples to apples, what you're asking, but if we were recruiting for that situation, there would be, steps we would take to make sure that those candidates have immense emotional intelligence to be able to coexist with a family ownership or someone who's been running that bank for years and years and years.
Yeah.
And in our process too, we would assess them for many different competencies around communication and leadership and forging relationships so that at least you can see that runway to those two coexisting peacefully. But that's a tricky one.
Yeah. And having spend a lot of time together too, like personal, maybe outside the interview process.
Yeah.
Dinners and maybe golf games or whatever.
So to see it in a social element, because more often than not, it seems like it works. Although I have seen examples before in my years of covering the industry where the CEO steps aside, becomes chairman. They bring in a new guy to a CEO. 3 years later, he's out, and the chairman comes right back in the second time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it definitely is. It can be a complicating situation for sure.
I see it more often than not, where you have finally CEO retires, is chairman of the board. They want to run the bank the way they've always run it, and they really are a hindrance for change, and it frustrates the new CEO. And it causes some issues and the things I've seen. So I have a very unpopular opinion that if you're a retiring executive, you're barred from serving on the board of directors for at least 2 years, to give the incoming regime the opportunity to implement their strategies and their desires. It's never going to happen, but I think that's the best thing. I mean, anybody here a college football fan? Okay. Kalen DeBoer is now the new head coach at Alabama. Guess who has an office down the hall from him?
Saban.
Nick Saban. Really?
That's not good. Yeah.
Now, Saban's pretty good about it, but still, you talk about intimidation.
But I think, Brian, also, when we talk to CEO talent, like top talent, they ask those questions. The board, like, do I have the ability to implement my strategy? And if they get the feeling they don't, they might take themselves out because they're getting recruited by other banks.
But there are good candidates for those situations.
Oh, yeah, of course.
You don't have to always be a visionary.
No.
I mean, that's just like the football analogy. They're game-changing quarterbacks, and they're the ones that manage the clock.
And there's Danny
And
Dimes.
then there's Daniel Jones, who doesn't do either.
Then there's Dak Prescott, who just got awarded $240 million yesterday. So,
Good to be his agent.
yeah.
Any one more question? All right, Perry. But the question really there is, in a nutshell, do you see the CFO role expanding beyond just being a balance sheet kind of numbers guy?
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier. I always look at the CFO position with like 3 pillars. Again, there's that accounting pillar. There's that, I guess, treasury, maybe you lump FP&A, and then there's I actually say strategy is the third. What we noticed when Silicon Valley Bank failed last March is that, liquidity, balance sheet management, financial risk was thrust forward. And, you can kind of extrapolate that in our mini data for doing all these CFO searches, is that those are the new competencies and experiential needs of a CFO. And so we've seen in some of the searches, that's what we're looking for.
Yeah.
So,
Capital markets, too.
But Perry, we can talk after. I'll tell you a little bit more.
Yeah, I was going to say, too, the nice thing is these guys are going to be here for the whole day. So grab them during the networking events. Sit with them at lunch. I'm sure they would love to keep talking about this the entire day. So let's...
Definitely.
Yeah. Thanks again, guys. Great panel. Appreciate it.
Thank you.